Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard throughout today's discussion lots of talk about advanced manufacturing. And today's final panel will discuss advanced manufacturing initiatives. The Army is developing its own strategy to use these techniques to provide readiness to the field at echelon. This panel will discuss how the Army partners with industry to keep pace and improve efficiencies to meet current and future readiness requirements. To moderate this panel, we're very happy to have Mr. Ed Fortunato, the Executive Vice President of Safran Defense and Space Incorporated. Mr. Fortunato leads strategy and business development initiatives across defense and space portfolios. A former U.S. Army Aviation and Acquisition Officer, Mr. Fortunato served as the Secretary of the Army's representative to Congress, shaping legislative strategies for national defense bills. He's got lots of degrees, sits on lots of boards. So, Ed, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. So this is your last panel. I'm really pleased to see how full the room is right now, and we've taken it upon ourselves to make this a good dialogue and keep people interested. Just real quick, can I see a show of hands of how many people here are from industry? Okay. Now, how many of you are not DC based? Like you flew here? Wow. Okay, so this is kind of important because we keep talking about this Army industry partnership. You know, on this panel, I'm as the moderator, I'll also be the industry guy because I've been in it for 16 years now. And you know, it's hard to do things in this business, as we all know, when everybody agrees. That doesn't always line up. So the question is, you know, from an industry side, you know, we're putting capital at risk, right? Like I like to say, like when I was in the Army as a PM, yeah, I had a lot of like I signed the back of the check. Now I'm signing the front of the check. For those of you who still know what checks are, it's a little different, right? So what I thought we would do is just I wanted to kind of frame it a little bit and then you know, introduce the panel and we'll get into some of the discussion. So let me just start with, you know, because we've got industry, DoD, and Congress. Like everybody has a piece of this because that's the defense industrial triad, if you will. So, you know, I represent right now Safran, right? I'm with Safran, 93,000 people in a company that most of you never heard of, all aerospace and defense because it's French based, but I've got 10,000 people in the US. So we've got about $2 billion that we've got invested into advanced manufacturing. And remember, it's advanced manufacturing initiatives. So that's digital design, digital twin, physics-based modeling. It's all these things that try to get stuff faster, less expensive, and better engineered into the products that the Department of Defense needs. And commercial, because we do use, right, like a lot of you. And the results are quite dramatic. And most industries, and I talk with all my colleagues here that do advanced manufacturing, you know, we're reducing lead times and manufacturing times sometimes 90%. Something that used to take 2 years now takes 2 weeks. Much less cost, much more efficient use of resources, precious resources, especially when you're exercising the supply chain. So those are the things that that my company's doing, and you know, and it crosses the spectrum from satellite propulsion through every part of aviation that you can think through, and it's not just an investment; it's a timing issue as well. Because remember, I've got 93,000 people I need to pay, right? So if I put a lot of money into advanced manufacturing, but it goes into a process, and it's easy to kind of like you could pick ground vehicles, but let's just take aviation because the regulations and everything is so much more rigid for the right reasons. So if I make something that goes on a Black Hawk or whatever, well, that's got to get tested. So to replace a legacy system with an advanced manufacturing system, maybe it's not a good business decision, although it'd be awesome operationally, right? Because I could do it a little bit differently. So if the validation process doesn't support it, that's a challenge. Those are some of the things that we deal with. If we move to Department of Defense, you know, there's a number of initiatives out there. We've talked about some today, a number of Office of Strategic Capital working on critical technologies, R&E additive manufacturing strategy, talking about economic and defense dominance, Joint Additive Manufacturing Group. Alexis mentioned the Manufacturing Innovative Initiatives, MII. So there's a number of them because obviously there's a strong interest there. And as they said on the last panel, the industry makes everything for the most part, right? DoD doesn't make it, but they're interested in having the advanced manufacturing initiatives and processes. And then Congress. You just take a quick skim of the FY25 NDAA, like we all do, because that's right. That's a good fun thing to do on the weekend. And there's everything from qualifying technology, developing formal advanced manufacturing capabilities, public-private partnerships, and the use of consortia. So there's a lot on the policy side, right? So all this stuff kind of comes together. So as we kind of get into this discussion, we're trying to figure out, how do we think about an investment from the industry side? And we talked about this a little bit earlier too, was the validation of parts and components, and then contracting. How do you contract something to incentivize and leverage and benefit from advanced manufacturing initiatives? And then how do you leverage your allies and partners? We had a little bit of that on an earlier panel to cover the supply chain gaps and kind of move forward and bring this all together in a meaningful way. So I think that's kind of some of the things that we want to talk about. What I'd like to do is just real quickly, you've got the bios in front. We've got distinguished people up here. But just real quick, General Lalor, running the Tank-automotive and Armaments Command, huge budget, oversees multiple depots, arsenals, supply chains, life cycle management. I mean, a real busy guy, fully involved into this stuff. And in a minute, he'll kind of give his perspective. Secretary Lowman, friend to DoD and Army, and has been managing and running logistics and sustainability and this stuff at the highest levels for a really, really long time. And then Dr. Ann Dix, who's interesting. We were talking earlier, State Department, USAID, a full career there. Now she's detailed to National Defense University, so she's actually working, and she can talk more about the advanced manufacturing studies that she's working with her defense group, but a lot of experience overseas and kind of seeing on the operational side how this stuff helps or doesn't help. So with that, what I'd like to do is just kind of turn it over to you folks and go through, and then we'll have a participative discussion as we move through it. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and look forward to a good discussion here. Michael Lalor, I am the Tank-automotive and Armaments Commander based out of Detroit, Michigan, and the home of the automotive industry. That's where TACOM's home has been back to World War II and the arsenal of democracy, and it has continued into today as we innovate up there now. And in terms of all things ground combat systems, sir, thanks for having us here. General Brown, thanks for having us, and the entire AUSA team for hosting us. I appreciate the continued partnership. Again, welcome to all my teammates up here on the panel, Honorable Lowman and Dr. Dix, Mr. Fortunato. So I think from TACOM, as we kick it off, and when we think about, and as you talked about, but just for those who may not have some of the background, we are the Army's, we do have 6 depots and arsenals across the continental United States. We do manage the Army's ground system equipment supply chain. That probably equates to well over 60% of the entire Army supply chain. It gets depends on what depends on whose metrics you're looking at, but it's a lot. And in short, between that and what we do in terms of managing the field level maintenance for the training and doctrine command, and then we have logistics assistance representatives worldwide, everywhere soldiers are across the world. So talking about 15,000 soldiers, primarily civilians, and also contractors in support of this mission set worldwide every day. And as Mr. Fortunato said, on a given day or given year, I should say, there's over $50 billion of at least flowing through TACOM's coffers in terms of executing readiness on behalf of the Army and in support of the Joint Force in many cases. My priorities often our workforce in this time. Also production, provide an output to that operating force. We focus on innovation, where we talk about advanced manufacturing, and of course, making sure people understand what our mission set is and getting that word out. You know, when we attack the the advanced manufacturing mission, it's about making sure that we can get effect to units in the field. Primarily, it's about filling gaps in that supply chain that I referenced, and then it's also about serving as a catalyst for Army capability at echelon. We are the strategic base, and then we foster that technology, those techniques onward down across the operating force, and I can describe more of that. You know, we are when I look at advanced manufacturing, I think about it from three realms: production, projection, and then proliferation. You know, in December, we ran a Army-wide advanced manufacturing session war game with a host of leaders from across the world at Rock Island Arsenal, which is one of our sites. And nothing better than being in the Mississippi, the Hawaii of the Mississippi there in early December. But we had everyone's attention. So when we talk about war game, what it was about in terms of that production is, like I said, we're producing from that point at Rock Island Arsenal each and every day. We started this last March, the first advanced manufactured parts. And so what we did was build the construct under, as many in here know, the Army's Battle Damage and Assessment Repair Program. We call it the Battle Damage Repair and Fabrication. And what we do there is every day in a short encapsulation of the program, we look at the Army's equipment status reports worldwide by fleet, and we started initially with systems that were over 90 days that were non-mission capable. Anything that was over that time horizon in terms of non-mission capable systems, we've been evaluating those ground system parts and looking at them as candidates for advanced manufacturing. If we can't get that support part through our habitual supply chain, vendors or other relationships. And so last March, we started to seed our own money, internal decision, and I authorized us to start manufacturing parts for units in the field under that construct. We will manufacture the part. Now we do leverage the components of the enterprise. So I have engineering support, supply chain support, and we test the equipment. We look at it from a legal perspective and an IP perspective. We pressure test, heat test. And if the part's good, I sign off on the risk assessment as the commander of the organization. That's the construct right now. We're moving more toward certifying machines and processes. We're in the midst of that right now, so we can produce at scale with velocity and where we may need to go in the future. That is our objective. And then units in the field through an Army XORD and that we set out last July. Units in the field can access us. Send us requests where they need particular parts, and or it gives them instructions that, example, if I can make a bracket for a Bradley fighting vehicle in 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, and that system has been down X amount of days, we'll make the bracket. We send it to the unit. They have my whole packet and risk assessment. They sign off on it. They make their own evaluation whether they want to use it. Commander he or she still has to assume that risk. We have a batting average well over Hall of Fame batting average of units accepting this right now. And at probably about a 95% success rate, units will take the part, they'll place it on their system, and no longer is that system non-mission capable. It's now fully mission capable. And as many of you know, with the DoD maintenance classification standards, it's now a slash and it's awaiting a part. And we continue to maintain the pressure on the supply chain and the vendors who owe contractually are obligated to produce that part, and we continue to monitor that part all the way in. When the part arrives, eventually a unit will take the fabricated part off and go with the qualified supply chain part. That's the initial program, and that's been a catalyst, and it's been driving good output and change throughout the Army. In the meantime, though, about projection is the other. I talked about production, talk about projection. We also looking at where we have capability arrayed on the battlefield. And that's where we've been working with the developing the Army's advanced manufacturing strategy and looking at where we have that capability across horizons. I think we need to have complementary capability from the tactical edge of the battlefield back. So example, on a tactical location right now, our units have the metalwork shop, machine shop set, which is the tactical unit system of record for advanced manufacturing. And they can execute a whole suite of capabilities within that system that'll continue to develop and modernize over time. I think divisions, corps should have a separate capability that's complementary, has some redundancy, but different. Back to the theater, I think each individual theater needs some of that similar capability, whether you're in Europe, the Pacific, Central Command, all of them have capabilities that I think they need to have their own capability. And then also back to the strategic. That's where we're going as an Army. That's the strategy capability at echelon where we're working towards actively. And then the other issue is proliferation. Data is the commodity. It is the coin of the realm here in this, and we have to be better in terms of data management, passing of files. We want an enterprise approach to this where we can share files. So, example, if our organization makes a particular part, and I'll give you an example. We made a M88 Hercules recovery vehicle. If you're familiar with that, it's about a very large 50-ton plus recovery vehicle. We made an actuating arm for that recovery vehicle at Rock Island Arsenal, and we're talking steel and titanium parts here. We're not printing polymers just anymore. We are in at serious serious substance here, and that actuating arm it is the part that protects the when you have an engine suspended and it's being pulled from a tactical vehicle and you're pulling, as we would call the pack on a tracked vehicle or an engine on a wheeled vehicle. It protects the operator because it stops the sway of that engine back toward the operator on the boom. So this is a pretty important part, right? As you would say, when we heat tested, pressure tested, and looked at that part, we were able to determine that part not only met the safety requirements, it was better than the originally manufactured part. That's the kind of production your Army is doing right now. And not only that, that's where digital engineering comes in, because now how do we make that qualified part better over time? And we're actually working toward becoming the source of that part, as an example, or being an additional source. I'm not trying to put anybody out of business, but we got to be able to produce at scale and on time. That's the kind of work we're doing as an example. So now, in terms of the data management of that, if we have capability in a theater that had that type of capability in the future, like a MSCK in Korea or a TLSCE in Europe and Kaiserslautern military industrial complex, if we could send that file to them and they could make that part, and we can cut down on travel, shipping, and contested. And we always, we talk about contested logistics like it's something new. It's been going on in this Army since 1775. So, we contest it every day. And we're our own contestation of it sometimes. But the point of it being, in all honesty and actuality, is we want to be able to pass that commodity and help production at the point of need for units in the field. So that's where we're going. Glad to talk about all that and more. We're doing, TACOM does even watercraft maintenance. So the watercraft that the on condition cyclic maintenance that General Hoyle referenced earlier, that's an effort by our command there to do forward maintenance in the Pacific. And we just had that LSV come out of maintenance. That's something that I had partnered up with Honorable Lowman there, in terms of kind of thinking through that as an example of regional support framework sustainment forward. And anything else from telemaintenance to how we use our logistics assistance representatives forward. They've been doing telemaintenance longer than anybody else for many, many years. And game to talk about that and our partnership and ideas for where we're going with allies and partners and interoperability. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. That was a mouthful.
Yes, sir.
I got to learn never to follow Mike Lalor. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Lowman, just retired as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment about 3 months ago. So I naively thought on September 30th, when I retired, that I wouldn't have to speak at these panels anymore. And then a good friend of mine and mentor, Mitch Stevenson, called me up and said, "Hey, could you sit in and talk about this advanced manufacturing?" And what I'll tell you is, my first thought was to look outside my door and ask somebody to prepare some remarks. And I got here this morning and I looked at the itinerary and it said Chris Lowman invited. And I was like, oh shit, I should have responded and said I'd come. So here I am. And certainly deeply honored to be here. And General Brown, thanks for the invite from AUSA. So I wanted to talk a little bit about advanced manufacturing, bring it up a couple of levels from the great description of what Mike Lalor is doing and the Army Material Command is doing and the Army writ large, because they're really, I think, leading the department. And I want to talk a little bit about, one, what the department is doing and the progress they're making relative to advanced manufacturing, and really enabling the services to adopt the technology, right? This is less, I think, about acknowledging the utility of advanced manufacturing. Certainly on the industry side, you guys, and Ed, you laid it out, just what Safran is doing and investing in it, and the gains in terms of returns you're getting from it. And so it's less about the utility of advanced manufacturing in the defense arena and how it can enable operations in contested theaters, how it can enable operations at the organic industrial base level, how it can help organizations like the Defense Logistics Agency overcome diminishing sources of manufacture, right? This is more about, I think, technology adoption. And sometimes the department's risk-averse approach to technology adoption and how we enable bringing it into the organic industrial base at a faster rate, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. OSD, their initiatives, first of all, there's broad recognition at the senior leaders of the OSD, ANS, and R&E ranks of the utility of regenerating readiness in theaters of operation closer to the point of need. And so we've overcome that hurdle. And so what OSD set out to do last year is really pave the way in establishing some foundational elements that would enable the services to latch on to enterprise solutions, make the necessary investments, and then proliferate those capabilities throughout their respective domains as appropriate. And right, so I would go around and I would speak a lot about contested logistics and advanced manufacturing before I retired. And when advanced manufacturing came up, whether it was with industry reps or whether it was government reps, on the one hand, it was the panacea and it was going to solve all of our problems. It's not. On the other hand, it was too hard. The data management was too hard. The intellectual property was too hard. And the fact that it can't do it at scale, it can't pound out 50,000 widgets, that there was no utility at all, right? And so the answer is really in the middle there somewhere. There's an appropriate use for advanced manufacturing techniques. And what the department has to do is really lay the groundwork. So one, they proliferate the understanding of the capabilities of advanced manufacturing throughout the services at echelon, both uniformed and civilian. And then they help to develop the ways in which we manage data and the ways in which we pass data and the ways in which we bring these type of capabilities up on defense networks globally. And so what we had envisioned was, we heard General Lalor talk very eloquently about what he's doing in the defense, the organic industrial base, where they're positioning capabilities within the uniformed formations of the Army. What OSD is really after is a globally integrated network of advanced capabilities that can be accessed by any of the services. So this is a combination of uniform capabilities for a commander to satisfy their needs in theater. It's a combination of industry capabilities worldwide, and it's combined with allied and partner capabilities in the theaters. And what OSD is after here is an ability to be able to transport that data and intellectual property to a point of manufacture closest to the point of need and produce against that. And so OSD funded a 2-phase project. We finished the first phase prior to my retirement. They're just completing the second phase now. And it was a pilot project to identify and the ways in which the data is transported. So be able to demonstrate that the secure transmission of whoever owns the intellectual property to a point of manufacture was possible, and it could be protected along that transport line. And the second element was that they could demand a component part and have it produced not by a DoD asset worldwide, but by a commercial asset worldwide on demand. And so they have now completed, as I mentioned, phase 2. They've connected an industry and government using a single secure unclassified network, right? So this gets to General Lalor's point about an enterprise solution. What we don't want, what the department doesn't want, I think, is an Army solution and a Navy solution, Air Force solution, onward and so forth, right? We want one DoD solution. And so what the Office of Secretary of Defense is after here is a package that they can hand to the services and say, this is proven, this is how you get to it, this is how you access it, and this is how you use it. So that connecting industry and government using a single source, unclassified network is complete. The second part is, which is not complete, is they'll demonstrate, one, that they can pass the data, and two, that industry can print 2 different, kind of radically different component parts. One is a printed circuit board, right? Which is, I think we can all agree in this modern era important. And the second one is to perform robotic incremental sheet forming process, which of course is a process used throughout the defense industrial base. So the intent here is to wrap that up, complete it, and then ultimately develop, document this into an authority to operate, ATO, that has reciprocity. So if anybody brings a machine up anywhere in the world onto a DoDIN, it has an ATO. And if you're not familiar with ATO, it is a very bureaucratic process that's governed by an innumerable amount of fiefdoms spread out around the globe. Normally, a GS-13 making a decision somewhere that it either gets an ATO or not. So the point here is to develop reciprocity. So an ATO, once it's awarded anywhere by any service, it's then allowed on a DoDIN anywhere else on the globe by any other service. And so I think this is a huge step forward. The second thing I want to talk about is kind of what the department should be doing, right? And what we heard today was from General Lalor and a variety of other people is these points of excellence throughout the department where they're integrating, developing, using, proving this type of capability. And really what the department needs to do here is start to integrate the capability within their initial life cycle sustainment planning effort. So advanced manufacturing, developing digital twins, integrating and connecting the production lines with the maintenance capabilities needs to be thought about and planned for early in the life cycle, right? Before we even go to a production contract. And that way it is just part of the sustainment framework once it does get out and is fielded to Army formations. Then General Lalor understands, hey, I need to be responsible to provide X number of parts in these type of capability areas, in these theaters of operation, when he gets the very first piece of equipment in a first unit equip to an Army formation. And it just becomes part of the sustainment capabilities. It's integrated into the OIB modernization strategies, onward and so forth. And then the next thing I think is, and I'm sorry, General Simmerly had to leave, the director of Defense Logistics Agency, because fourth estate agencies like DLA can play a large role here. There's an enormous amount of backlog and demand for component parts that have diminishing sources of manufacture. They're just, a lot of the department systems are older, and we talked a little bit in the previous panel about the vagaries of demand and the fact that commercial enterprises can't stay viable over long periods of time when they're inconsistent demand. Advanced manufacturing capabilities are tailor-made in some cases to answer this problem set. And so what I challenged General Simmerly to do prior to my retirement was to integrate advanced manufacturing into his demand planning and demand satisfaction at all of the DLA sites to identify, out of all of these component parts that are older than 180 days or 270 days or whatever the right metric is, how many lend themselves to advanced manufacturing to satisfy it? How many of those does the department own the intellectual property versus not? And those of you who've been in this game for a long time know the further back in time you go in terms of capability, the more intellectual property the department owns. The closer to today we get, the less intellectual property we own. And that's just an evolution of industry's realization of the value of intellectual property, right? So we heard on the last panel this discussion about special negotiated licensing rights. And OSD has put a policy out and said, hey, look, this is what we want to encourage. We want to encourage the PEOs and the lifecycle management commands to enter into these special licensing rights. And it's essentially a royalty, right? You're just buying access. So every time you print a part, you pay $1, right? And you're creating a revenue stream for an intellectual property owner, and you're gaining access at the manufacturing level to intellectual property that the department needs, right? So we've been very binary over the years. It's either buy it all, way too expensive, so we buy none of it, or we buy just such a thin layer of it that it's useless in terms of manufacturing and second sourcing things. And so that policy exists. And when you talk to, when I would go around and talk to a variety of PEOs, or I would talk to LCMC commanders or their staffs, a lot of them didn't realize that OSD had put a policy out that allowed this. So we don't need any acquisition reform, right? We just got to take advantage of what we already have authority to do. And then on the flip side, we need industry. The department needs industry to realize that sole sourcing for the life of a system and retention of that intellectual property so that you are the sole source isn't going to work operationally. Not in peer competition, not in the Pacific, not even in Europe, right? And so what you need is flexibility, and what you need is a business partnership. And so what I would ask, challenge, being on the industry side now, what I would challenge this community to do is be receptive to that. When you see a sustainment plan come out, and there are special negotiated licensing rights associated with it, be receptive to it, right? You're still a partner. You're still an IP owner, right? But, and you will likely still be the source for most of those demands. But where the department needs to execute manufacturing in something other than your facility, they need the access to the intellectual property to do it. And so I think that's a viable path forward. And then I think I'll stop there. I welcome your questions. Thanks.
So now I'm the oddball in the group here, but that's been the case ever since I landed at the National Defense University. How many of you have been through the National Defense University in one shape or another? How many of those were Eisenhower? Hooray! Okay, good. And this is another question I wanted to ask before we start. Of the industry partners that are here, how many of you contract out the manufacturing function versus retain it inside? One? Just one is contracting out. Everybody else is within your corporation or your organization. Wow. Okay. That's an interesting thing in itself to observe. Yes. Okay. And how many of you actually do manufacturing? So yeah, it's about 30% maybe. So yeah, so it isn't that many of you that actually are in the manufacturing business per se. How many of you is it data and analytics? Hardware. Okay. Yeah. So there you go. That's another 50% right there, maybe. So yeah, so it's an interesting thing to observe as an outsider coming in, because that's really what I am. I'm an outsider coming in and observing and trying to do at the Eisenhower School what I would normally do overseas, working with partners and allies and developing programs between civil society and government in other places. And so I guess that's my role here. And part of what I do also at the Eisenhower School is we want our students to be able to work across the government and to be able to work with industry. And so the way we're set up at the moment is we try to bring in students from industry, students from the civil government organizations, as well as from the joint forces. And so we're trying to come up with that common operating language that you were speaking about over the course of a year as they try to obtain a master's degree. I think one of the things one of the most interesting things we do at Eisenhower is the industry study program. And so what we do is we divide the students into 20 different seminars, and they cover a range of topics from robotics to AI, to aviation, to marine applications, unmanned vehicles, even climate change. And of course, I got the lucky straw and I got advanced manufacturing. And at first I was like, what am I going to do with this? I work in developing countries and you're asking me to deal with advanced manufacturing, talk about a cognitive disconnect. But what I quickly realized is that the challenges that you are facing are very similar to the sorts of challenges that we encounter overseas. And that is that, a business needs to be able to operate. They need to have a sound policy environment in order to make things work. So it needs to be a business enabling environment. And very often what happens is that people who've worked in government for a long time don't necessarily speak the language or understand where business is coming from. And so what a lot of what I try to do through the advanced manufacturing industry study is get those students, who are on the cusp of being promoted to colonel. Some of them are on the cusp of being promoted to general or to admiral, to have those conversations in an environment where, the standard rules don't apply, right? So you don't have to have a gag order because, there's a procurement coming out somewhere and you can't speak to industry, right? And all of us are familiar with that experience. And to be able to actually learn about some of those challenges and how industry thinks. In advanced manufacturing, of course, 98% of the businesses are small and medium-sized businesses. And once they reach a certain level, they generally get bought up by one of the large contractors. And that's just the way it is. And there's many reasons for that. Whether it's good or bad, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, everybody's needed in order to do this business. But the other piece of it, I think that's somewhat challenging is that whole supply chain. And you can think of supply chain, all the way from, who owns the mines, right? And I get a lot of that, where I was working in Africa, right? We had a copper mine. I was in Botswana, and we were working with the Canadians to secure access to the copper mine instead of it being bought out by the Chinese, right? And this is right adjacent to China. And it turns out, well, copper is important. There are other elements that are even more important to us that have even more limited supply and sources. And as you all probably know, there's the big challenge of, where do you these supplies of rare earths and other minerals are getting harder and harder to get at because everybody's using them, right? So, you're talking about things that maybe it's like 1.7% of what's in that mine is going to be your copper, right? And then you need that to do a 3D print on something, right? And you have a problem because you can't access the material or the process material for example, with the semiconductors at the level of purity in the U.S. that you need in order to produce some of the parts, the mega chips that you need in order to fly some of your planes and power some of your satellites and other things. So it covers a range of topics there, and also there's the whole school of, well, what do you do with the advanced materials? What kind of materials are we using or can we come up with to substitute for these other elements that now we can't get our hands on, and where are we going to get them from? But we don't have visibility into the supply chain. And when we try to have that conversation with industry, people tend to be a little cagey about the supply chain because obviously it's a matter of competition, right? But getting our students to understand all these factors and to think about it, from that perspective is a big part of what we try to accomplish over the course of a semester. So they conduct this industry study and they try to take a look at, the three, labor, industry, and then what are we going to do to build more resilience in the system where we are now, just to put it simply. And so that's the goal of what we're trying to get our students to understand through basically, what I would call an assessment. We do a survey, we go out and talk to all these different parties, we talk to academia, and we also talk to a lot of these advanced manufacturing centers, like with the Department of Commerce, a DOD. So we will travel to different parts of the U.S. where, certain aspects of the industry are strong, and then we will go out into the facilities and actually see what industry is doing. And then we'll do a comparator with another country. And so that's how we sort of build that situational awareness. Just to share, a few vignettes from last year, I think our students were very surprised at how many jobs are generated by one manufacturing job. So for every manufacturing job out there, you, as a multiplier of all the services, supply chain, everything else that you need in that ecosystem, you're going to develop something like 4 to 16 jobs. And the higher end tech manufacturing is going to actually generate more jobs than some of the more simple manufacturing operations. So that always is a big eye opener, because maybe you don't think of the defense industry as a development partner, but when you're working in some of these states that are, less advanced, you definitely bring a lot to bear to the table when you bring manufacturing into a community or a place. And so those are the sorts of questions, as I'm exposing the students to the different technologies that you're using, that I'm trying to get the students to understand. And then when the students visit the industry, they'll ask, or I encourage them to ask questions such as, well, what kind of policies have been problematic for you? And, what do you think we should be doing about it, right? Because we want that public consultation to take place. And sometimes it's not something, if we're coming from government, we're very comfortable doing, but it really needs to happen. And so to get them to get that down, to document it, and then come back to Washington and share it with people like Christopher Lowman at that higher level at the end of the semester. And so that has been, I think, something that has turned out to be not only a learning experience for the students, but also for some of the speakers who come and talk to our classes. So and since it's all non-attribution, it works quite well for everybody, right? Because we don't share who said what. We do this in a very open-ended sort of a forum, and as a collective, then it comes across, I think, maybe a little differently in terms of learning about what kind of challenges we might be facing or encountering, depending on what perspective we're coming from. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more to say. I think when you take them out, like I took them to Canada last year, and they're like, well, Canada's just like the US. And actually it's not. And, and to be able to deconstruct that and take a look at, well, how does Canada get their labor? How do they manage that? How is that working for them or not working for them? When we look at some of the high-end technology that they're developing, or the components and parts that they're providing to us, how do we work with that? I think that for me has been the more interesting piece of understanding the dynamic and how advanced manufacturing, is either working for us or isn't. And I think, on a final note, I'd say we like to think everybody is working at this really high end, like GM with their 12-minute, what is it, the F1, F whatever motor that you produce into every 12. Is it every 12 minutes they produce one? And that's their most popular item. And they have this really streamlined high-end factory, and they just pop them out, and they have the, everything from the digital, twin to the, helping people assemble the parts all the way across, or Rolls-Royce. You see that with some of the Rolls-Royce motors as well. But then when you actually go to most places, that's not what you see, right? Because the scale of the business isn't there, and the demand signal isn't there. And so you talked about interoperability, and I would like to layer into that. It's not just about having the interoperability, but it's from our end, right, from the government end, but it's how can you use these components and parts for other things, and how can we build things with as many components and parts that we can use for a lot of other stuff, while at the same time, using some of these components and parts for what we need, at our, high-level national security side of the equation. And I think, when you look at some of these pieces, then you try to scale back and decide, well, what is critical? What do we need to do? What do we need to control? And what can we do to let go of some of the rest of that, so that business can also thrive and move forward. So anyways, that's me putting this in very simple terms. How did I come into this? Well, my job is to teach everybody, and to get people to talk to each other. And I guess that's what I did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. I've got a number of questions here, but just in listening to this, I'd like to just ask this question to the panel, and I'm going to take it from an industry perspective, because what we've kind of look. This is the defense procurement system, right? It's basically set up so that I cannot engage one-on-one, shake hands, sell the car, do the deal, and make money and move on. There's a process that you have to follow. And if you don't follow the process, then you can't participate. So if you look at it from, it's kind of like the nexus right now of IP, and Dr. Dix, based on your scientific polling of raising hands, you can see that a lot of manufacturing is done in-house, especially if it's a critical or dynamic component, right? They want to retain the control of that. So they want to retain their IP, but then you've got MOSA, because you don't want vendor lock, and you want to maintain competition, and you want to be able to take that technology and be able to produce it in a forward distributed environment. You don't want to just go back to the factory. If I can produce it on the ship or produce it in the field, you can do that. And at the same time, there's a real business decision. So how do you factor this in? How do you structure RFPs and contracts to reward and incentivize industry to utilize advanced manufacturing initiatives so that they can compete, follow the process, but it's not just feeding somebody's ideal? That's the question.
All right, let me take a shot at it. So really what you're asking, Ed, is how do we contractually enter into the next paradigm of sustainment, right? Today, the department and the services, they buy capability, they react to demand, or they react to readiness issues in the field, and they turn to industry on the second and third tier, sometimes the OEMs, for the newer system, and they demand material to solve the problem, right? And I think what you're getting after here is the future of war is going to demand a more interactive and flexible and integrated sustainment framework that includes industry partners right there at the material management level. So I heard a little bit earlier about prognostics and diagnostics and how the intent there is to better understand probabilities of failure, to better refine posture investments that the services make, where to posture parts, where to posture capabilities. All of that is important. None of that really works in modern war without an industry partner. And so I talked a little bit about IP and the different types of IP access contractual arrangements that we need to consider. What I will tell you is that at the speed of this new peer kind of conflict in contested environments, it's really going to be a three-legged stool. There'll be postured capability that is in the uniformed services. There'll be allied and partner capabilities that we should rely on. We heard from the Australian on the industrial base panel, the capabilities Australia brings. That's what regional sustainment framework is meant to address. What do you need in those theaters from the allies, not the US government, in order to sustain combat capabilities? And the last one is industry, right? And industry has to be because you already have it. You already own much of the intellectual property. There are weapon system capabilities. Probably on the far right of that spectrum, a good example is the F-35, where the OEM owns virtually everything about that particular capability and makes a lot of those higher end sustainment decisions for the department. And then you have capabilities where the government owns almost all of it, and that's in the older legacy parts. And so what we need here is, I think, industry input. What the department needs is industry input to help develop those licensing and contract arrangements specifically for the sustainment of those capabilities. So how do we structure the production contracts? And what deliverables and access does the government need that will transition once those capabilities go into operation, so that General Lalor and his command, or Miranda and the Army Material Command, can take advantage of that partnership and that access in a not in a sole source environment. Because at the end of the day, what the department has learned over the years is, if you don't ask for it in the production, the initial production contract, when you're in a competitive phase, you are likely never to get it because it'll be too expensive. And so what we have to decide here is, hey, what is the department? How are we going to sustain ourselves? What are we going to rely on industry to do? And then be consistent. If we're going to rely on industry to do something and they make a capital investment to facilitate, to establish capacity, to train a workforce, to employ that workforce, then the department has to be consistent and say, hey, look, this is your role in the sustainment of this capability. This is what the OIB is going to do. And so one thing, so that's the first thing. The second thing is the department and the services have to get much more forthcoming in what you are going to invest in terms of capability and capacity. What are you going to modernize to do? Because at the end of the day, you guys will do anything, right? If the chief says, I need this, you'll pour money on it, you'll create it, and you'll make it happen because it has to happen, right? And so what as you know, you've laid out this 15-year modernization plan for the OIB. So my question to you is, how do you communicate that plan to industry and say, look, this is the capabilities we are going to invest in the United States Army. Don't duplicate this capability, right? This is going to be our segment of sustainment. And then on the flip side of that is, these are all the things that I need you to do. And I'm going to contract with you, industry, consistently for the next 30 years to provide this capability. And so that is a challenge. And neither side of that equation communicates very well. But it needs to be an integrated sustainment capability from the very first discussion and requirements, documentation, and request for proposal. And I'll stop there.
Sir, thanks. I think just to, be additive to what you're saying, sir, and I 100% agree with all. I think from the Army side, as we modernize, and like you said, OIB modernization, we need to kind of continue to build our level of transparency and overall our business development strategy and share that outward. That's going to help. To your point, concur there. As far as us at a more the strategic, operational, tactical level, uniform side of the Army, what we need is a partner. I think most of the time, and we appreciate that from industry, most of the time the questions I receive are, hey, I would like to help you and I'd like to print your parts. That's not what I need in advanced manufacturing. I need a partner, not a transactional relationship. I need someone who's willing to assume some risks, some cost sharing and partnership, and help me develop the capabilities and fill in the gaps where we have them as a team. And then meanwhile, we can work out the intellectual property relationships. Example, if you got an emerging laser fusion powder bed technology printer that prints 4 times faster than mine, you don't. But there are some of them out there that are really good, and we have some too. But my point is, it should be complementary to ours. You want to work through something like that. If you're in a manufacturing realm, then we can work some kind of leasing and partnership realm. If there's something else, we can work intellectual property. If there's someone else who's willing to do risk cost sharing, we can talk about forward positioning in a theater where we're going to need it. Those are the types of things on my mind. Thank you.
So I'm going to throw my 2 bits in here and actually turn the tables to you. And so now that you've heard us talk a little bit about what we think, should be done or what we're taking in, how do you feel about it? Do you feel comfortable with what we're saying? Is there something missing? We'd like to hear from you.
When you set up the pilot, you talked about when you took initiative to create that part and use advanced technology. And the idea was you would have that until that company that had the actual contract could produce it. Obviously providing some feedback potentially, because on the road to discovery, maybe you said, hey, we're going to share information back to you, you can do this faster. Was that deliberate in order to avoid them sort of sucking through their teeth saying you're about to take the part of the contract away, we've developed all this thing? Because it seems to me what you said to them is, in an emergency, we've got to do what we've got to do. We haven't lost faith in you. We don't want you to let your supply chain go. But right now, and you do find with some of the long relationships with companies, they do get that. Where you have to fight though is, I also have been the head of a large enterprise. We get really high on ourselves, and we feel like, hey, I know our job is to take care of the Intel enterprise, but we're really good at creating these shower curtains. So I know we're supposed to buy them from you, but now we're going to build them ourselves. Is that part of the tension that we're going to have to deal with? If you want to maintain an industrial base capacity and keep Americans and partners at work, and you contract to build something together, you need the flexibility that when the shit's in the fan, excuse my language, but when it's all hitting the fan, then you can create that amazing American or partner initiative. You do it, but you're not then getting so high on yourself that you're putting, the plant in Detroit on the work. Was that part of your initial thinking to avoid friction, or is that really part of your strategy to keep everybody sort of happy?
Ma'am, it's thanks for the question, and absolutely is deliberate. Was to make sure that people understand going in that, in my view, that we need both to be successful. We can't have a sole source relationship. I'm not trying to put anybody like I said, we're doing what we have to do so we can, in exigence, fill needs, create depth, and meet the requirements at the point of production. All good, man. But my choice in doing that was absolutely deliberate. And in all honesty, and in good faith, some of the Army leaders have seen what we're doing and are like, hey, this is awesome. Why do I need the supply chain on that? I'm like, no, hold on. We need them because we all need each other here. And it was deliberate in choice in how we constructed that because I want that feedback. Like you said, though, at the moment, and I've conveyed this to industry partners too, is that the reason I'm doing it is that, at the moment of need you can't produce it and I need it, I'm going with or without you. I got to execute and I got to produce. And it's like Honorable Lowman said, like Chief says, go, I'm going. And that's it.
Well, we're a little bit over time right now. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank AUSA for bringing us together. We're never going to solve all the problems, but it's kind of like going back to school. It forces you to think and make some contacts. I want to thank Kevin Engler. He supported all these panels. He supported us, and it helps just this thing kind of move forward. With that, sir, back over to you.